Hi, I'm Steffi Luting, and if you're new here, I draw a lot of Hazbin Hotel and Helluva Boss fan art, and my followers have been asking me for some time to do an instructional tutorial of how I draw some of the characters from the Helluverse. So I thought, that's scary, let's give it a go. So here we are, and we are going to be starting with Niffty. Just to caveat this, I am not an official animator of the series, I'm just a dedicated fan artist with decades of drawing experience. So yeah, I might get a few things wrong, but this should give you some general tips and tricks for drawing the characters. This tip has actually nothing to do with the drawing process itself, but more to do with paper selection. If you're not selecting the correct paper for your medium, whatever coloring tool that you're using, then the final product won't look polished. I use Ohu alcohol markers, therefore I use Ohu alcohol marker paper. It just gives me the best effect. My next tip for you is to divide the page at least into quarters and kind of roughly sketch out where the heads are going to be, especially when you have a multi-character piece, because it really helps you in the long run planning out on how these characters are going to interact. Now, getting into our subject for the day, it is Niffty. So we're just going to start out with a basic shape for Niffty. She's kind of got a round head. That does change, especially when she gets angry. And she kind of has almost like two triangles for her hair. So I've kind of roughly sketched that out here. I've also done some like bylines to sort of adjust for where the face is going to be and where the features are going to be. Now Niffty only has one eye, which makes her drawing a little tricky, especially because her one eye is so expressive. It takes up nearly half her face. So you need to take that into account when you are drawing Niffty, that the eye is going to take up more than you think it will take. I like to roughly sketch out where all the elements of her face are going to be, and then fill in the details afterwards. So I am doing a little bit of detail with the hair. It kind of gives me some anchor points. Anchor points are really important. If you get like those angles right, then it helps the rest of the piece look right. The eye is one, and for Niffty, I would say, as with many of the Hazbin characters, if they've got hair is really important. You'll see that when we eventually get to the Alistair one, I'm going to work up to that one because that is a hard tutorial to do. Once you've got the groundwork of Niffty's face correct, you then need to go on to her hair. And this can be a little bit difficult because the angles in her hair are so interesting. Some of them are super sharp and some of them are very flowy. There's a couple of things that I would say here. Her parting is always lower on her left side than it is on her right side. They're never fully matching. Also, with the flick, the yellow is sort of like within that flick, so make sure you encompass where that red comes up to that yellow. I would also say when you're looking at a reference photo to also look at what the coloration of the line work is. So the difference sometimes between Niffty's yellow and her red in her hair is sometimes demarked by a black line and sometimes not. So just pay close attention to that. Now with the actual length of her hair, you need to make sure it is even on both sides. I sometimes find that I put a whole line round the bottom so I can get it even on both sides. Unfortunately, my hand is covering up what I'm doing here. I need a better angle, but you can kind of see once I pull away what the finished product is. I'm then adding her little scarf just to add some of the final details, and then I will go back in and refine extra elements of the sketch. Now that we have our basic Niffty, we can go in and start doing alternative Niffty faces. Niffty has a very expressive face, and a lot of it is due to that big eye. So you have to really pay attention to the eye shape when you are drawing Niffty. I've said that before. Her eye still takes up 50% of her face, but her face shape changes. It contorts with her expressions. This is kind of very obvious with Niffty because she kind of goes from having a circular face to an oval face, especially when she's like angry or very, very manic. And that's kind of what I've done with this one here. Many of you will know this is from the scene where she's driving the train. Niffty that we see in Clean It Up is also very different to your bog standard Niffty drawing. She's got a few little extra quirks, especially her eye. The eye is still massive, it still takes up a large portion of her face, but it is a completely different shape, and the pupil is totally different as well. The hair is similar, but not exactly the same, so pay close attention to that when looking at your references. The little curly bits that she has on the end, the little flicks that she has, are much skinnier in her anime version, and her coloration is totally different, which we will see when I color these in later. I'd also like to say at this section, don't be scared of making mistakes. That's what erasers are for. I have rubbed out so many different parts of this and then re-added them back on because they weren't quite right. It's best to actually do that and start again from scratch. And I would also recommend including elements that you know that you might not draw on the first take. So in the iris here, I've got the little heart, the little star, but when I'm actually coloring this in, I won't add them till later, but it gives me the confidence to know where they are in the composition. Now, when sketching a full body Niffty, I like to block it out. So the head shape is going to be slightly more oval for the Niffty that I've chosen to draw, but I wanted to get all her elements roughly in place. Her little spindly legs are always a little bit hard because they're impossibly thin, but they are also shaped in a way, like little knives, like shooting down. And I wanted to do her from the scene where she's, unaliving Adam. So I've kind of done a mix. So I've used a reference photo, but a lot of it was close up on her face. So I've then had to add the body in afterwards. Using amalgamation of reference photos is always a best bet to give you a more accurate to canon style of these characters. But you should be free to experiment when you are drawing them. If you want to make them as accurate as possible, that's fine. Like, it is fun to do that, but it's also fun to experiment and to add your own spin on the characters. So if it's slightly different, don't worry about it. As long as it's readable as the character, what's the point? Anyway, yeah, so I've roughly sketched out her body using shapes and then going in to add the detail. When it comes to hands, I hate them, as does most artists. They are a pain to do and can really throw you and be hard to do accurately. There's no real cheat code for hands. You really just have to practice them. And I would say maybe looking at your own hand, although Hazbin hands are obviously sharp and spikier with a curve to them. And they obviously only have 3 fingers and a thumb, which I sometimes forget, especially when I'm looking at my own hand to do a unique pose for it. But yeah, unfortunately, there's no cheat code for hands. You're just going to have to practice them. If you've been enjoying the video so far, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps, and I have a lot more Helliverse content to share with you. Now that my nifty sketches are complete, I like to go in with my Ahoo fine liner drawing pens, and I go in with a 0.05 pen to begin with. Also use the Stabilo pens for the colour line work as well. So we'll start with where I'm using a 0.05 pen to begin with. This is just to give me a very thin line. I will go over the line work later, but I like to have a line to begin with to colour up to. It gives you a clear edge and you don't get any of those nasty pencil marks left behind. And using colour fine liners, I find that it's best to leave them to dry for a significant period of time, ideally 24 hours. Although if you don't have time, like I didn't when I was doing this, I left it for a couple of hours and it seemed to be fine. To be fair, I didn't have a lot of colour fine liner work on this piece, not like when I'm doing one of the angels, and I have tips for that when we get there too. So starting off with the skin, I like to start off with the lightest colours in the piece. That's because I always find that if you slightly nick a different area next to it, you can bring some of that colour into that area. Now for the white of her skin, I like to use like a gradient of purples and pinks, ending up with the colourless blender just to really push it all together. And then for the hair, I've just gone for a gradient of reds up until an orange base. So I like to make it a little bit more orangey at the edge of her hair, just to give some definition. Now, I didn't include a picture of the yellow pens that I use for this. If you're interested, it's a colour called Sunflower and another called Acid Rain. I like to use a minimum of 3 colours, specifically on the larger areas. And if it's a massive area, I might go in with 4, like I've done here on the hair, just because I love to give it a slower graduation. I always go from dark to light. I find that helps the blend, and I sometimes go back in with the darker colour just to add in a few more darker areas to really make it pop. But we're gonna add some more definition in with our colouring pencils afterwards. Adding graduation to Nifty's eye is very important to making her very clearly red as the character. It is hard, I would just say. Take your time and maybe practice on a piece of paper beforehand, especially if it's the first time doing it, before adding it to your piece, because you want that blend to be smooth, but her iris really clearly needs to be a different shade of yellow, a lighter shade of yellow. Now that we've done our basic Nifty, we can go in and add these colours to the other Nifties that we've done. Now I would say the Clean It Up Nifty has got slightly different coloration, so I have gone in with a slightly more pink base. And now we're going to add in some definition with our colouring pencils. I use the Yahoo ones, and I also recommend that if you're using colouring pencils, an automatic sharpener is a blooming must. I was hurting my hand so much before I got an automatic sharpener. I also use a hand guard to avoid smudging. These pencils are incredibly soft, and you can find your page turning a very mucky shade if you don't cover your hand. Now with the pencils, I like to go in with a mixture of darker and lighter shades, darker than what's even on the page and lighter than what's on the page. It kind of just adds more graduation. Now using my color theory, I also use it to create the shading pop more. If you just use blacks or grays, it can make your piece look a little bit muddy. So I kind of tend to use a lot of purple in my shading. It goes really well on red and obviously on the pale white skin that we have here as well. But I also mix it with more traditional colours such as the reds, going all the way up to an orange for the highlights on the hair. Again, going from a darker colour all the way up to the lighter colour because it makes for a smoother blend. Now we've added the shading to our basic Niffty, I can add the shading to the other 3 Nifties that we have here. Now that the shading is all done, I like to go back in with my liners to make the line work as crisp as possible. I go in with a 0.1 pen fine liner in the same brand, the Yahoo brand that I used when I first did this. And I also go back in with a 0.3, for example, with Nifty's eyelashes, because they need more coverage, but I don't want to go too large because I could wipe out my original lines. I pay close attention to the lines where I have already drawn, but I can sometimes nip within, especially because I like to outline all of my work. You will see what I mean at the end, what I mean by outline. I think this step is critical for creating really well rendered and really crisp pieces of physical art. It just really helps with making it look clean. So I would really recommend that you go in and do this final step. Here's the final study. What do you guys think? Will you be attempting this yourselves? If you do, please drop your results on my community page. I'd love to feature some of your artwork as part of next week's episode, and drop your comments for what character you would like a tutorial of how to draw next, and I may just do it next week. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you've liked this video. I've been Steffi Luting. Thank you for watching.